For several weeks, we have been on a journey of this Christmas story. We looked at the Old Testament prophets and what they had to say about the coming of Jesus. We looked at Gabriel appearing to Zacharias in the sanctuary or in the temple and telling him that he and Elizabeth were going to have a miraculous baby by the name of John the Baptist. We looked at the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary, telling her that she would be with child. We looked at the angelic visit to Joseph to confirm what Mary had told Joseph and to give him the charge of being the earthly father. And every time these messages came, they were independent and they were separated by time and space so that there couldn't be any hearsay going back and forth. But yet each one of them confirmed the purpose of Jesus and their particular role in this story, because they all had to accept their role in the story. And so we begin in Luke chapter 2, verse number 1. And just a little bit about Luke before I read this traditional Christmas story. Luke is not a Jew. He is a very well-educated man. He is a physician. He is a doctor. He records events in a chronological order. He records events also to correlate with what's going on in world history at the moment. It's not just a religious event that he's recording. He is recording world history and the birth of Jesus. And as we read this, it is very detailed and coming through, and it's like reading a physician's notes and report. So in chapter 2, verse 1, it says this: At the time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed. In other words, it was not optional. It was decreed that a census must be taken throughout the Roman Empire. Throughout the Roman Empire. Verse number 2. This was the first census that when Quirinius was governor of Syria, all returned to their ancestral towns to register for the census. In other words, if your family was from a particular area, you had to go back to that area. It wasn't a census taker knocking on the door. You didn't go online and fill anything out. You went back to your particular area. And so all returned to their ancestral towns to register for the census. And this was important from the Roman government standpoint because they wanted to make military calculations. If they had an uprising, they knew how many people were in an area and of each people group, and also how to collect the taxes. Verse number 4. And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. So he is required by the government to go back to his family heritage home. Now, there's a couple of different routes he could have took, but most scholars believe this is about a 70-mile road trip. A 70-mile road trip. There is no Interstate 30. This is by foot. Let me see if I can bring this into a very practical application. You are going to walk by foot, ride a donkey, get a bouncy cart, and you're going to go from here to Hope, Arkansas. Wow. And you have a 9-month pregnant woman with you on that journey, crossing all the terrain between here and there. Do you kind of get the picture? We see these little Christmas cards, and they're just going across nice, smooth land, and it's just a joyful little trip. I don't think it's the way it was. So, here it is. He is taking Mary with him on this 70-mile road trip. Now, just a little footnote. Isn't it interesting that God used the government to put Mary and Joseph in the place they needed to be to fulfill Old Testament prophecy? Very interesting little footnote. Verse number 5. He took with Mary, his fiancée, who was now obviously pregnant. To which I would say, you think? Now, in previous weeks, we looked at this, and we looked at the engagement. That it was a prearranged marriage. It was a contract. That engagement was about a year long. They could have very little contact with one another. Mary goes off to see her relative Elizabeth, who is now miraculously pregnant. She tells Elizabeth that she's pregnant. She comes back after 3 months being out of town and tells Joseph, her fiance, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. And all of you got real quiet. And Joseph has to work through all of this. And we've talked about how he had to think about whether he was going to divorce her, which in those days meant bringing her before the religious court. The religious law at that time for the penalty for adultery would have meant that Mary, the mother of Jesus, would have been stoned to death. Or could he do it quietly and break the contract between the two families, because it wasn't just between Mary and Joseph, it was between their families, or move forward, and then the angel visits Joseph and he decides to take his part. Thank God for Joseph's role in this also. Verse number 6, and while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. Now, Mary and Joseph, I just have to stop and think. Perhaps they thought to themselves, 70 miles on foot, even in good condition, is a that's a long journey unless you're a professional athlete. 70 miles. And I'm just thinking, once they get there and those labor pains start, that's always such a joyful time, labor pains. They're probably thinking, look, we have done everything that the angels ask us to do. Why are we here? Why now? And we don't know that they had any family with them. There's no indication that they had family with them. So perhaps Mary's thinking, it would be nice to have Mom here, or where's Aunt Elizabeth or something. Here we are, the labor pains are now a minute apart, and I've got Joseph. He's a carpenter. And we don't know if he brought his tool belt or not, but there's nothing in that tool belt of a carpenter's tool belt that's going to help us having a baby. Now, I know you ladies love your husbands, but when it comes down to the delivery room, you want a professional that knows what they're doing. You don't want your husband. I'm just thinking, poor Joseph, what if he brought his skill saw with him? What's he going to do? Hammer, chisel, And here they are in a strange town. They're out of town, no family, perhaps there to be there. And verse 7 says she gave birth to her first son, or first child, a son, and she wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. Now, if you've ever studied this, you know the word manger basically means a food trough. An animal food trough. That's the reason when you see all the little nativity scenes, usually it's a little cradle. It's not a bassinet. It's just kind of a food trough is what it is. And they're in a stable. Now, I know we've built a little type of thing here, and this would be the little food trough. We kind of did the traditional little thing. But I want you to think about where they're at. In Israel, there's not a lot of lumber there to build barns. So more than likely, they were probably in an area next to a cliff or a little honed out area, a little cave type of thing. Now that I've picked up Jesus, I'm trying to figure out how to delicately put him back in here gracefully. And because if I don't do this right, all the mothers are going to glare at me just right. So I'm going to try to do this just right. And I'm going to cover up how I do this so that I don't do it just right there. You good, Jesus? Thank you. So, verse number 8. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks. And suddenly the angel of the Lord appeared among them, and there was the radiance of the Lord's glory around them. They were terrified. But the angel reassured them, don't be afraid. He said, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You'll find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger. And suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to those whom God is pleased." So we have Gabriel appearing to Zacharias, then we have Gabriel appearing to Mary, then we have an angel appearing to Joseph, now we have the angelic host appearing to the shepherds. That's 4 angelic visits within a 9-month period of time, all independently, all working together to fulfill Old Testament prophecy and announcing the birth of Jesus. Verse 15, when the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this thing that has happened, with which the Lord has told us about." They hurried to the village and found Mary and Joseph. And there was the baby lying in the manger. Now I want you to just note that they responded immediately. They hurried to the village. They responded immediately. I wonder sometimes if we don't miss the blessings of God when we do not act on God's voice quickly. Verse number 17. After seeing him, the shepherds told everyone what had happened and what the angel had said to them about this child. All who heard the shepherd's story were astonished, but Mary kept these things in her heart and thought about them often. The shepherds went back to their flocks, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen. It was just as the angel had told them. So the shepherds are telling the story that about the angels and about them finding Jesus, and they see this miracle happen and their lives are changed. Now I want you to think about this for a second. When you realized who Jesus was, who Jesus is, who Jesus will be, I believe it transformed each one of our lives. For 33 years, he left the throne of the universe and became a human being like us. For 33 years. He didn't have to do that, but he was willing to lay his life down so that he could have a relationship with each one of us. That's what moves this from a story to reality. Right at the end of his life, he calls his disciples together for the very last time in a place called the upper room. And he sat down with them with bread and wine, and he began to talk to them about the sealing of the covenant, the sealing of what he had done. It wasn't just that it was coming to an end, but it was actually the beginning of something new called a new covenant, a new testament, for us being reborn, the new life. So the Christmas story is not just about the birth. That is just the beginning of the human side of it. It moves all the way through.
And he rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness.